Please feel free to eat or drink or do anything in here. I've had a lot of people try to distract me when I preach, so the spilled coffee isn't gonna mess me up. So I enjoy it. I've been sort of looking at Psalm 130, the psalm that Thomas read a moment ago, and for me sometimes it seems like, oh, well, duh. This is a very simple, easy sort of text, but I've learned that when you read through texts over and over again, or when you pray on text, or when you think about texts, all of a sudden something else hits you. And I don't know if this is a real term or not, so I may have made it up, but and I wrote this in a blog on the website, just a short thought, but given the readership of our website, I'm assuming that no one knows what I'm going to say, so that's okay. And I'm sure this half's thinking, oh, you have a blog? And then this half's thinking, oh, you have a website? You know, The Way has a website, The Way has a Facebook, The Way has a Twitter, and we actually try to update them, which is rare sometimes. So every now and then we'll post thoughts during the week because, you know, as I said before, it's not always just Sunday. Sometimes we're thinking about theology and hopefully thinking about God outside of Sunday. But anyway, I was writing the blog post, and I like to consider myself something of a method reader. And for the theater folks, that may make sense, but a method actor is someone who becomes the part. They don't just step onto the stage and say, all right, I'm going to become this person now. They end up living that part, the way they think, the way they speak a lot, and so that they can be more natural and more fluid and really be more real when they do the part. And so as a method reader, I feel like we have to get into the mind of the writer of the text as best we can. It's been a good couple thousand years, but really trying to think, all right, what were they thinking? And even a step further, because for me sometimes I'd like to try to get into the mind of the readers as well, the people who have read this at different times, the people who have experienced things and saw this as a message from God to speak to what's going on. And one of the instances that I wrote about were these early Israelites who would have this and other psalms, and they'd call them Psalms of Ascent. And they would take these psalms, I think it was 3 times every year, and climb a mountain, singing these psalms. And they would take this text they would take this movement as a physical depiction of the spiritual change that was taking place for the community and to the individuals. And when you see something in front of your face, like a mountain or a side, it makes it a little more real. And with The Way and our service, I feel like we're sort of ascending as well. If you're new, we actually started October 5th, about a month ago. I've already seen this progression taking place. And right now there's a lot of excitement. I've had some great conversations with some of you, some people who aren't here, and they were just really excited about what's going on. And I'm an extreme extrovert, so I get really, really excited back at you, and we just feed each other's excitement, and it gets louder and louder and louder and louder until something happens, because these things don't always last. And there was one woman who I was talking to last week, and I verified she's not here, so you don't know who it is. But she was like, oh, I really love the way that the preaching happens. I really love the music. I really love the feel. And I'm thinking, yeah, tell me about the electric guitar. What do you feel about the electric guitar? But and then all of a sudden it just built up and built up and built up, and all of a sudden she just said something that was like nails on a chalkboard. She said, it was all just so perfect. And at first I'm like, yeah, and then what? Because we're not perfect. Thinking something's perfect for me leads to 2 things. Either one, you start investigating that thing and trying to find what little thing is wrong that makes it actually not perfect. And I don't know anyone doing that about this because we're still learning. Or you get this separation. Because I'm not perfect. And I'd venture to say, unless someone wants to tell me otherwise, we're all not perfect here. Jeff, are you perfect? All right. Well, you were the closest thing I thought, so... But what this really spoke about to me was just perceptions and how we view things and how we understand things. And all this goes to really understanding the text, too, and the people who wrote the text or read the text. And you're probably not going to be able to see this, but I used to love... I'm a Facebook junkie sometimes. And I don't know if it's on their Logan, but there's a Facebook... yeah. You guys remember these things? Well, basically, they would pick a profession or a, person, and they would do these, sort of perception graphs and say, what my friends think I do, what my mom thinks I do, what society thinks I do, what I think I do, and then, kind of what I actually do. And I was looking for one on pastor, and they just didn't have anyone that I felt like I could show. So my wife's a lawyer, so I just went with a lawyer. But I just love it because, when you see things like what my mom thinks I do, there's just, there's this view of being higher, and it just, and unfortunately I haven't seen these things recently, but it's such a good illustration. And for me, when I was looking through the text, there was this same deal with the writer of the text. And there's some debate, but I'm going to go with David for who wrote the text and that view. But I don't know if anyone is familiar with King David. Anyone? No? All right. He's a small character in the Bible. But when I think about David, I think about slaying Goliath. At one point, someone said, "Oh, there's this giant. He's making fun of the Israelites, bullying people, saying that if someone kills him, then we'll leave him alone." The king didn't want to do it. The army didn't want to do it. And here comes this kid, David. And David says, "All right, I've got to do this." And David slays him. And then we hear about David's conquest in military. Saul, who was the king before him, had this. They had this thing that said Saul slayed thousands. But then they'd say David slayed tens of thousands. So David had this, I feel like, it wouldn't be Captain America, it'd be Captain Judah or Captain Israel sort of picture. And what really brings it to a head is this tagline or title that David gets. Does anybody know the tagline? If I said, David, all right, Logan, you want to show us what the tagline is? A man after God's own heart. If you look at a lot of scriptures that mention David, there's this comma, a man after God's own heart. And so thinking about this author in that light is sort of disconnecting. Is sort of thinking, well, if he was that great, how can I really identify with him? But in reality, David wasn't that great. In reality, David did a lot of terrible things. David, when held up to these laws, I know you can't read them, but if you can, they kind of look like stone, and they are the 10 Commandments, or 6 of the 10 Commandments. But David had issues with idolatry. David had issues with other gods. David committed adultery. David even murdered the husband of the person that he committed adultery with. So when we think about that, we hear this next section, the beginning of the text, that says, "I cry out to you from the depths, Lord. My Lord, listen to my voice. Let my ears pay close attention to my request for mercy." We've got a man at his lowest point, a man thinking about the deeds he's done, the laws he's broken, and the separation that has become between him and God. And he was in agony over it. And then the text continues and asks a question. If you keep track of sins, Lord, my Lord, who would stand a chance? If you keep track of all the broken commandments, all the things we do wrong, who would stand a chance? And that's when it sort of gets back to the present day for me. And I think, that's a good question. If you keep track of sins, who would stand a chance? And I just polled probably the holiest people that I know, and it doesn't seem like anyone would stand a chance. But as we ascend this mountain, we experience the same struggle that David felt. And as we think about things we've done wrong, things we've had issue with, things that are sort of holding us back, I think we find ourselves in this pit. But maybe not a literal pit these days, maybe not a literal time of agony, maybe it's something else. And I have this kind of running joke with this statement, and it's sort of the epitome of when I get frustrated, or when I think, all right, I can't do anything else. I'm as far as I've gotten, and I can't, do anything better. And it's probably a phrase people have used quite a lot, and probably will continue to use. And the phrase itself is, it is what it is. It's this moment that, I can't get out of the pit, so to speak, any further. It just is what it is. It can be humorous. I've used it those moments where I've realized too late that my coffee cup lid wasn't actually on all the way. And I'm late for church, and I'm thinking, all right, I'll hit it with a water and a towel, and it is what it is. Or I'm sure many of us have that scratch on our car that was the end of the world when we bought the car. We thought, oh, we're going to fix it. We're going to do something about it. 15 years later, it is what it is. But however, this sometimes isn't so lighthearted. Paul writes pretty matter-of-factly that all have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And this presence of sin and this failure, we can also be left with this feeling of, it is what it is. If we hold ourselves up to some of these same commandments, do not have any idols. Well, I don't have any golden idols, but maybe I have some economic idols. Maybe I have some automobile idols. Do not commit adultery. Well, I can safely say that I haven't committed adultery. But then Jesus goes on and says something like, any man or woman who lusts after another person has in fact been guilty of adultery. No confessions, but I'm just not going to answer that question. Honor your parents. Well, most of the time. I can't quite say I've always done it. Do not steal. Maybe not robbing banks, but there have been many things that I feel like I've been guilty of stealing. And I think if we reflect, each one of us, that there have been there times where we've taken something that wasn't ours, whether literal and actual or something more. And then do not murder. Well, I will tell you I haven't actually murdered anybody either. But again, Jesus takes it to a next level and says, if any one of you has any anger or hatred in your hearts, you've been guilty of this commandment. And I'll admit that I've hated, I've gotten angry, I've gotten so frustrated that more than likely I've broken this one as well. And then we get to the point in this revelation or this experience that we're left on our ascension of the mountain feeling something like this. That's an image that I see in my head a lot of the times when struggling, and I think that's a feeling that we have. We've started at this bottom of the pit and we're trying to work our way up, but yet it feels like we're pushing this boulder. And to make the Sisyphus reference even more real, for him it was pushing it up only to have it roll back down and only to push it up again. And because of this boulder, we're getting nowhere. And if that was the end of the story, if we were left pushing this up a hill, if we were left with these laws, if we were left in failure and in the pit that David describes, we wouldn't be able to do anything. We wouldn't be able to go anywhere. But thank God, we read in Romans from Paul that while we were still sinners, plural, still in the pit, Christ died for us. Well, how does that work? It works because Christ wasn't guilty of any of these rules, breaking any of these failures, and he was perfect. So perfect that he not only kept the law, but fulfilled it. We hear a lot of stories about Jesus, and when we apply him to the same commandments that we failed, David's failed, countless other people have failed, we see a different image. Jesus, when held up to have no other gods and do not have any idols, we see a different picture. We see Jesus in the wilderness. We see Jesus tempted with bread, tempted with a proposition to bow down before Satan, and then everything would get better. But he didn't do it. Jesus continually honored the name of God, teaching and living in his glory. And as far as the Sabbath goes, Jesus not only kept it, but revealed its true nature as a gift and not a curse that we are to be shackled by it. And when Jesus went into the wilderness to pray, he had a moment where he said, if there's any way for me to not have to do this, please take this cup from me. But then he uttered these words, fulfilling, honoring his Father.
Not my will be done, but yours.
And Jesus didn't steal or murder. Jesus didn't have hatred in his heart. But in fact, Jesus was hung on a cross, surrounded by two men who have been guilty of stealing, and was in fact hated, in fact beaten, and in fact would be murdered. And in the fulfillment of these laws, something new arises. This idea of love. Love embodied in a dying man hanging from a cross, bloody and beaten, speaking for those who had cursed him, spit on him, and those who would soon murder him. Uttering the words, "Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do." And for us today, we don't find guilt or innocence, perfection or failure in the laws that were once here, but we find purpose in this life of Christ. Not this religion of rules, but this community of love. A community much like this community, imperfect, once in the pit, once lost, once destroyed by ourselves, but now redeemed. The psalm goes on to say, our hope is in the Lord. He will redeem his people. And today, he has redeemed his people. And that boulder that we struggle with, that not keeping of the law, it's more that we're not focused on Christ. It's not that we're held back by, did I do this, did I do that, did I fail this, did I fail this? It's that we're not looking at the man who fulfilled the rules and the law. I always forget the name of this book that my wife's reading with a few other women in the church. And I haven't read it. I haven't researched it, and I probably couldn't even tell you the author's name if I was asked. But it's sitting on this end table by our door. And as you walk by the door, I catch a glimpse of this title that's on it, and it says something like, "The Beautiful Faith of a Sinner and Saint." And this morning I sort of thought to myself, isn't that who we are? A community of sinners and saints, not one or the other, but in some mysterious and incredible way, both. A community of sinners and saints, which gets me really excited. Earlier we prayed for our time as individuals that our faith would grow and our relationship with God would grow. And we prayed for a time of community, because it's not merely this one-on-one, but it's this relationship of a community with God. And we also prayed for the world, because in seeking to love our neighbor, we will be led outward to meet the needs of our society, who they themselves are calling out from the pit of hunger, the pit of pain, the pit of persecution, and so many other things. At this time, I'm going to ask Jeff and the band to come up, and Kathleen to join me and lead us as we celebrate Holy Communion, something that we do every week. And I just wanted to share a reflection on communion. When I think about it, I think about what had happened. Christ sitting with his disciples sharing a meal, but I also think a lot about us. We who are the body of Christ. In the same way, we who are taken, we who are claimed by God, we who are taken as his own, and then we who are blessed in the same way as the bread. But following that, we're broken. Something happens in life, something gives us a trial. Yet after that, we're sent out, given out to others who are in need. But at this point, bread's still bread. At this point, people are still people. Nothing's really changed. But until that moment that Jesus takes the cup and says, "This is my blood that was spilled for you," it's then that the feast is truly prepared. Then that those elements of Holy Communion are Holy Communion. And then we, who are both sinners and saints, are able to worship, to build community, and to minister to a world that's in much need.